stand out, don't fit in is the phrase that I have been using at the very end of my every podcast episode. When I say stand out, it has nothing to do, first of all, with comparison with others. So I don't mean stand out from others. What I mean is stand out by expressing and being who you really are, regardless of what others might think or feel or perhaps criticize. It's all about being authentic.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage.
So if you've ever felt a restless knowing that you're meant for more in this life, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Authors on Mission, the podcast that takes into the minds of experts from all the domains to learn how they translated their purpose into prose and grew into the leaders they were born to be. Today's guest is the embodiment of what it means to stand out, not fit in. Dr. Agi Keramidas is the dentist turned podcaster turned author behind the internationally acclaimed Professional Development Mastery podcast and a book that he wrote a couple years back, 88 Actionable Insights for Life. This is going to be a wonderful episode where we talk about his book, his work, and of course some writing tips. So without further ado, Agi, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Danielle. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation.
Of course. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on and to meet you and to learn more from you. But before we dive into your book and everything else, let's learn a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you go from being a dentist in Greece to podcaster to author and being here today? How did that all get inspired?
Well, it's a lifelong path and journey. As you said, I was born in Greece. I lived there until I was about 35. I practiced dentistry there. What's important, I think, to mention is that transition where at 35 I decided to leave my home country along with my job, friends, family, everything I knew up to that time, and moved to the UK, where I have been living since, in pursuit of a calling that I felt, something that was calling me here, instead of where I had been living. So that's the one thing I believe that makes it's important to mention. The other, because you mentioned the transition from one thing to the other. When I was in my early 40s, I went through what, many people call it a midlife crisis. I don't, I won't call it like that, crisis. So rather I would say midlife awakening, which changed me in the sense that I realized that dentistry, which I have done, all my life up to then, was not something that I wanted to do for all my life after that moment. So that led to a transition over the years. It was not something that happened overnight. Led me to public speaking, then to podcasting, and the book. You mentioned all this, so I'm just highlighting everything because it's quite a lot there, and I will follow wherever you think it is more relevant to go.
Of course. Well, thank you for kind of walking us through that. And it's very interesting to see that it was just kind of a calling, as it sounds like, just a calling to transition from dentistry, a calling to, transition to a new place to live. So all of that is very inspiring. You mentioned going through that, that midlife awakening around, at that age that led you to reevaluate your life. Does that have to do a little bit with what changed that trajectory then?
It has to do with, the fact that I'm speaking to you now it has to do with that time because how I was, let's say, it's closing to 10 years now, 10 years ago. I would not be doing this. I would not be, I was very hesitant to speak to people I didn't know, let alone to go on a podcast or on a public forum like this and speak out my things. So it really changed very much my direction as what I do, and also my many things about my inner world, or perhaps a better way to describe it is how I perceived myself and what was meaningful for me to do. So it certainly it was a big turning point in my journey.
Of course, yeah. And so I really appreciate walking us through that. I think we all kind of go through similar traditions in our lives. We can all relate to that. And I think that's exactly why, your book and your podcast resonates with so many people. We all have a moment where we have to reevaluate and think about what's next. And I guess that ties directly into your personal motto, stand out, don't fit in. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how does that apply to your endeavors?
Of course. Stand out, don't fit in is the phrase that I have been using at the very end of my every podcast episode for, I'm closing to 6 years now. I'm doing my podcast. The way I mean it, because on its own it can be taken in perhaps different ways, especially the stand out part. When I say stand out, I don't mean it has nothing to do, first of all, with comparison with others. So I don't mean stand out from others. What I mean is stand out by expressing and being who you really are, regardless of what others might think or feel or perhaps criticize or anything like that. So the stand out and don't fit in is, in a way, it's a complementary part to the standout. It's all about being authentic, really, and following and doing what's in here rather than what is expected of you or you grew up with or anything else. You asked me how it applies to me. I think the most obvious example that I can give, and I will give a little bit of background so that it makes even more sense, is the fact that I am having a podcast, speaking publicly, and having my opinions, shall we say, heard by many people around the world. The 10 years ago, something like this would be completely impossible for me. I wouldn't have even considered anything like that for the simple reason that I was very hesitant to speak out anything that was in my head. I was always up to to that turning point. I was always a very shy, reserved person, very hesitant, let's say, to speak out things unless I knew the other person very well. So that, the big change on that and the word authenticity that I mentioned earlier, I think that is the clearest example of my own path following that motto. The motto came later. It didn't come from the beginning. It came later when I started the podcast, but it really resonated.
Of course, I think it's a very inspiring one. I think it's something that, again, everybody can relate to and learn from, of course. We don't want to just be doing the same thing as everybody. It's important to stand out, which is why, you have your podcast. It's definitely something that stands out. And of course, the 88 Actionable Insights for Life are insights that stand above the barrier too. So maybe this is a good transition into the book itself. Just like in this podcast, you cover a lot of ground in the book, talking about morning routines, discovering purpose. So what do you say are like the three most life-changing insights within your book? What would they be?
This
Or
is
perhaps your
it's
favorite.
always a different, difficult question, but I will tell you some that come up now. Certainly have been very um, life changing, as you said. It's a really right word. One of them is you already mentioned the morning routine bit. When I say morning routine, I will very simply define it as a series of actions that you deliberately do in the beginning of the day. And
Mhm.
we all have a morning routine. Unfortunately, many people have a morning routine that is neither deliberate, so it's kind of random, and it's not empowering either. For example, if someone wakes up and turns on the TV or looks at their email as soon as they wake up, it is a morning routine. That's what they do.
Yes.
Is that good for them? I very much would have to say no, it is
Mhm.
not good for them at all. So that is one mm, element, let's say, or life-changing thing that I have picked up in my own personal development journey and put it in the book because I believe it is very important. I will only say one more comment about the morning routine that comes up now, that when we wake up in the morning or the first minutes or perhaps 1 hour, or depending on what our schedule looks like, but that is probably the only time in our day that we are in control of what might happen, because once we start our workday or leave the door and go out of the house, we don't really have control of what might happen. We have plans, but things often have the tendency not to go according to our plans. So by um, being in control of that portion of the day gives an overall sense of groundness for the rest of the day. Uh, One other, I will mention one other which I did, another insight, I mean, that I actually heard for the first time in the podcast, and I picked it up in the way it was described by my guest at that time, was that our reality, what we see as or experience as our life, our day-to-day life, is determined by our beliefs, our perceptions, rather than what it is outside. And, some people that might sound that, that's not right. It certainly has to do with what is happening outside. I will give an example, which was something that I think it will make clear of what I'm about to say. Let's say there are two people that are two friends that are walking down the street. One, and they're having a conversation. One of them loves dogs. He's really into dogs. The other one had a bad experience as a child and terrified of dogs. So as they walking, suddenly a dog starts running towards them. The external event is exactly the same. There are two people walking and a dog running towards them. Internally them, or the reality, how they experience that moment is very different. One of them is overjoyed and excited and wants to pet the dog. The other is terrified and wants to run away. So it's not about the external event. It's about how we perceive, what kind of beliefs we have, and how we interpret it.
Right. Exactly. Yes, I love that the way you explain that, and you offered a lot of examples too. I noticed like the story about some people have morning routines, some people don't. You offered a lot of examples. Same thing with the dogs. I can tell that this is something that you also did in your writing then, because you didn't just give an insight, you gave examples to show people how it could apply in their own lives too, which I think is a really great tactic for writing. Would you say that that was like a something that you did throughout the book too, kind of like to relate to people?
I think we, as readers or generally humans, relate very well to stories and examples as like that, rather than purely theoretical concepts. It's useful to have the theory, but it's much more difficult and less people will relate to a concept, and that's why I gave that example about the perception and the reality. Because if I just say it like that, some people might get it, or perhaps they are familiar with it, but for some, it is the example that clarifies it and makes it relatable. Say, oh, yes, that's me as well, or I have experienced something like that.
Of course. Yeah, and thank you for that. And I'm sure that you've learned all of that from like your podcasting journey too. So I'm curious to know what it's like to go from podcasting to writing world. What exactly inspired that shift, and what differences do you notice between like, the speaking conversations with people, but then also writing down insights? There must be some overlap in skill, but also some differences, obviously, too. Um, so I guess to clarify, what sparked the transition, and what do you notice in terms of like similarities between the two pursuits?
Sure. Well, I wouldn't call it a transition because I'm still a
Of
podcaster, and
course.
I identify as a podcaster much more than the author. That hasn't really sunk in the same way.
Right.
But to answer your questions, the inspiration, Tim Ferriss was the inspiration because he had done uh, some books like Tools of Titans, etc., that he took content from his podcast and he compiled a book or books with that knowledge or wisdom. So I had read his books years before I had the idea to write my own. And then I reached a point after a few years doing the podcast that I realized that I did have a lot of information, knowledge, wisdom even that my guests have shared, and also some of it was my own reflections. Uh, and I thought, this is the time for me to do something similar to that example that I had been inspired very much by Tim Ferriss's books. So that was the inspiration bit, your first question. And then the differences are way too many. I mean, when you have a conversation on the podcast or when you speak, generally it will take less preparation, and it is generally again less polished.
Mm.
With a book, I suppose you could do a sloppy, unpolished book, but it would not be very good in terms of people reading it, because I don't know about you, Daniel, if I open a book and I see typos or I see something that really doesn't look right, it's highly unlikely that I will bother with the
Right.
book. So I think that is one of the first differences that come to mind, that the book will requires um, a deeper level of detail, perhaps,
Mhm.
or to make it as uh, clear and as I'm using polishing in quotation marks, as polished as possible.
Understood. Yeah, so I guess you're right. Like one of it's like a lot more rigid, I guess you could say, right? A lot more details involved, and the other is more just, you're speaking, so it can kind of go in many different directions. So I
Mm.
get that. Um, but taking the spoken words from an interview and translating it into the written page can be tricky. But a lot of people do try it. I mean, you gave it a try. You're inspired by somebody else, right? So other people do the same. If people are interested in doing the same thing, what kind of tips would you offer them? Like, what challenges did you face in taking that content and writing it? What was like the hardest thing for you to do?
If we're talking, are we talking now specifically of having already some content and wanting to put it there?
Exactly. Yeah, the writing process itself.
And actually, now that you say it, because when I wrote the book, ChatGPT was not there. It's been 2 years since it was published, so it was more than that when I was writing. So nowadays, it would be much easier to have at least the structure or a skeleton of the book just by putting all the transcripts or all the content in there and letting the AI do some classification or some give you some common threads or whatever else that it is. In terms of the challenges that you said, the main challenge that comes to my mind is desire that many of us have for the so-called perfection. I joke sometimes when people ask me, so how long did it take you to write the book, or a similar question to what you ask. And I say jokingly that the first 90% of the book took 90% of the time. The remaining 10% of the book took the other 90% of the time.
Okay. Yeah, that's how it always goes, right? You think it's one thing, but then it's the other. So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Now I'm curious to know that. I mean, you do have this book out, but what's next on the agenda? Have you considered creating more books or maybe another endeavor? What can we be looking forward to in the future?
I have thought about doing another book, and to continue in the same theme or thread, because I have much more interviews and podcast episodes since that time. I have thought about that. I think and perhaps that is also something important to mention. The reason why I have not done it yet, and I don't know, things will change, I'm sure, at some point in the future, but the trigger for me writing the book when I did was something that came internally. It was like an intuition, if you want, something that one day I thought, this is the time to write a book, which is something that at the moment I do not have. So I'm not saying that I won't write another book. I will, I will. But when that feeling comes again, and when I'm more clear
Right.
on what I would like to present next. Otherwise, I have thought about it really to do a book, another 88 Insights for Life. I could do that easily, but that's not what I want to be doing. I would like something different, which I haven't found yet.
Right. Okay. So I guess that requires a lot of kind of what you did before, maybe like some introspection, thinking what's next in my life, like we talked about before, like that shift in mindset. So I get that, you don't want to just stay stagnant. You got to think of something new. So who knows, right?
Indeed.
But where can somebody go to stay in touch and learn more about you and be ready for whatever that next step might be? Do you have of course we have the podcast, but any other links that they can head to connect?
The main link is my main website is from the podcast, which is Personal Development Mastery Podcast.com. There will be links. You'll find links to social media, to send me a message for the book, everything. That's the easiest. I will say it one more time. It's Personal Development Mastery Podcast.com.
Okay, well, there you have it, everybody. We're going to put the link in the description box of this podcast today, too. So if you're interested, you can just, click on over and get in the know. Agi, this has been an amazing conversation. You're very insightful, and we've learned a ton. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
A real pleasure. Thank you very much, Danielle.
Of course. And everybody listening today, if you feel called or inspired by this, well, click on over. And if you want to write your own book, Authors on Mission does offer a ton of services for angel writing and editing and marketing. So nothing's holding you back. I mean, take advice from Agi. You got to make your dreams happen. You can't just stay in one place. So I love it. Without further ado, then, everybody, keep writing, keep reading, keep leading your mission. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.